It's connected. Okay. Oh, ya entró todas las personas que estaban.
Okay, everyone's coming in. Those that were in the waiting room.
Bueno. Un saludo especial para todas las personas.
Warm greetings to everyone who's joining us today. We're going to be talking about very interesting topics. We are going to try to build amongst all of us, build the environmental peace our planet needs. And we're going to have an interesting dialogue about the first lines of peace building from a ecological viewpoint. I'd like to tell you that our country is walking through a very fundamental path. We need to do this, to walk this path, to consider everything we want to achieve: social peace, peace with justice, peace with environmental justice, especially. And today's afternoon, or this evening for you, afternoon in Colombia, evening for all of you who are in other countries, we'd like to tell you that we are very pleased to be able to participate in this opportunity, in this Congress, in this very wonderful event that talks about that, about environmental peace. And of course, it tries to build, because building a better world is a type of building that should commit all of us. We should all be committed, each and every one of us. Everyone on the planet should be committed so that we can make sure that this and future generations have better life conditions. We're going to have a very wonderful panel. It's a wonderful panel this afternoon to talk about environmental peace building in Colombia. And this panel is enriched by people who have been working in the academia, scholars who have been working on these topics that involve building Colombia with peace and environmental justice. Okay, so we want to welcome every one of you. And I want to point out that it's key to understand the process that we're going to follow today so that we can contribute to the dialogue. The dialogue will also let us see what has happened in Colombia and what conditions we're in. Today, for example, Colombia is suffering, a very complex situation in a very important area that is the Amazon. Now, about that, we want to talk about precisely about that. Those of you who have joined, I am Gloria Amparo Rodríguez. I'm a professor at Rosario University and Magister of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, JEP in Spanish, and we hope that we can have elements to continue to work. We want to encourage everyone, invite everyone, so that we can continue to contribute to collective peace building. Okay, this is how I want to tell you, first of all, that each one of the panelists will have the chance to talk during 15 minutes. 15 minutes to talk about their view in that environmental peace building view. And I want to invite, so that then you prepare your questions, the audience have your questions at hand, because the idea is to have a dialogue that allows us to build together. Okay, first of all, I'm going to point out that we're going to start according to the, just as we had foreseen at first. We're going to listen to the voices of the regions, voices of women, voices of those who are working there in the field. So I want to welcome Lorena, Sebastian, Legibet, Natalia, a warm welcome. She's not going to be able to join us today because of some difficulties, and Carolina Montes and Natalia Domicó, with whom I'd like to start this dialogue today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about who Natalia Domicó is. She's an Embera indigenous woman in Antioquia, in the region, Department of Antioquia, in the north west of our country. She's a candidate, a master's student on pedagogy of motherland in Antioquia University. It's going to be a very interesting dialogue that is taking place. And from the wisdom of the communities, she's also the national coordinator of a very important network in the life and territory. She advises the Indigenous Council in Chiquigoro, also a professor of the pedagogical program on Mother Earth at Antioquia University. She's also a member of a group on Diversar at that same university. Nataly has had experience in very interesting academic exchanges in countries in America, such as Mexico, Uruguay, and Bolivia. And she wants to talk to the world today. She wants to talk about that view that involves knowledge and traditional knowledge that they've received as an indigenous member. It's been passed on orally, and she can convey it, tell us about the progress in the academia. So first of all, I want to ask Natalia to join us today with her remarks. Go ahead, Natalie, you have 15 minutes to make your presentation. Thank you. Well, good morning or good afternoon. She's speaking her native language. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm going to present, I'm going to share my screen.
En esta ocasión, ¿me confirman si ya ven la pantalla?
Sí, sí, señora.
Perfecto. Bueno, en esta ocasión estaré compartiendo mi ponencia que se llama Mujeres Tejedoras de Vida y Paz Ambiental, desde la experiencia de la Red Étnica de Mujeres para la Defensa del Medio Ambiente en Colombia. Y quiero comenzar comentando un poco el contexto en que nos encontramos las mujeres defensoras ambientales en Colombia para
To tell you where we are, the defending women who defend the environment are the contextualize the work that we are doing in Colombia, how we defend the environment. I'd like to start with this quote from big women who have been doing this type of defense in the world. And that she says from other places, women have been silenced in different ways because of historical situations that have affected the sacred relation that our peoples and the motherland have lived because of the colonization, discrimination, the influence of religious currents and structural violence and systematic violence that there's been against women. Now, this quote is very important because it tells us about it helps us talk about the issues that we environmentalist women live in Colombia. And one of those problems is the obstacles, the hurdles to go into participation spaces. We still have a male-based, a chauvinist structure that is expressed in all governance models. This first obstacle has two sides. The first one is let's say the main public thing is for men and domestic or home things are for women. In simple terms, that's an issue that we women have lived throughout the world, and is that their roles have minimized the capabilities that we women have, and they have stated that our duties are only in the home. And I'd like to give an example because most women, those of us who are part of this network, we are women who have been born in the center of indigenous and peasant and African Colombian communities. It's a process that started to arise in the 70s when all these expressions started, all these movements of the social organization that started to take place, and they hid the participation of women. I'm going to give a couple more examples from the indigenous side, knowing that African Colombian women and peasant women, they always have the same problems, the same issues, but we in the indigenous movements, as it came out in the 70s, only until 2001, between 2001 and 2003, actually, it was when we started to see the councils of gender and family, where they placed the role of women, that it was not only at home. And we linked women, but as a matter of fact, only that category, unfortunately, to take care of the family, to take care of the home, to be busy in that sense, in that gender, and they minimize their participation in the other scenarios and other scenarios where women have been able to should have been able to participate. And there absolutely the lack of legitimacy for women to participate or give their opinions in issues of environmental governance and territorial governance, actually not to recognize the work that they do, the care that we have done in favor of natural resources, how we have protected natural resources. They've made us invisible. And historically, we women have preserved the seeds. We have kept this culture of sowing, to take care of gardens and plants, and to be those who grow and the plants, and we have biocultural relations. And we should say here in Colombia, what we're doing, not just in Colombia, but throughout Latin America and the world, the peoples, we are not only preserving nature, looking at nature as a static being, but to us, nature is a relation, is a very profound relation to our own culture. So culture does not exist without nature, and nature does not exist without culture. We have those ancestral practices from our great grandparents to bring environmental well-being. So it's been women, it's us women who preserve those cultural practices that allow environmental preservation, conservation, and so on. By sowing seeds, taking care of the seeds, keeping seeds, and also cultural practice, for example, dance, singing, songs, and different cultural expressions that are all connected, very importantly, and related to territory preservation. Another context that we live in Colombia, we women who defend the environment, is murders and threats against leaders. And here in Colombia, it's a huge issue. The killings of defenders of the territory, they are killed, they are disappeared, social leaders as well. There's a report on Global Witness, I think it's a 2021 report, says that in Colombia is the most dangerous country in the world for those of us who defend their rights related to the environment and the territories. And at the end of 2021, the Ombudsman's office produced a report where in the middle of the pandemic, that was 2021, 2021 were years of this emergency of the coronavirus, the pandemic. Here in Colombia, there were 145 leaders, social leaders were massacred, they were assassinated. Just to have an idea, it's a big issue, the dimension that we're talking about. We defenders and leaders, the environmental defenders, what we face in Colombia, all these situations that we live, all this background, and not just to talk about these barriers and hurdles, but also the opportunities and the work we're doing. We women are doing it, territories are doing. So we were able to build this interethnical national network to defend the environment. It was the first meeting called by UN Women with Natura Foundation. And we were able to meet, recognize, acknowledge the work being done nationally, what women are doing to defend the territory and to preserve and protect the environment. That's why we came up with this idea. It was 2019 to incorporate and start the collective work of 35 women, rural, indigenous, peasants, all kind of women, Afro-descendants, whose objective is to mobilize the public agenda in our country to take care of the environment, have gender equality, and build peace through local, national, international advocacy. Now I want to talk about the actions we're doing, we women, environmental defenders are doing to build environmental peace. We came up with different categories. As a matter of fact, we could not explain or tell all 35 experiences, but we tried to give examples of a few of them so that you have an idea of the impact and the work we are doing as environmental peace builders in Colombia. One first category is the urban alternatives for food security. Here's very valuable work by a female leader in Bosa, Bogota. It's a district of Bogota, the capital city of Colombia, and they're promoting agricultural vegetable gardens for healthy food using spaces, natural spaces that the city has to promote the consumption and the sowing of healthy foods. It's a leader called Ines Vasquez in, again, Bosa district in the southwest, no, I'm sorry, southwest of Bogota. Here's very important work being done by a leader in Antioquia. It's a proposal of indigenous education, taking into account that Carmen, that area, there's been a big impact of, I'm sorry, there's noise from other microphones. Other categories are bioeconomics, and here we'd like to highlight the work of a very beautiful process that is taking place in Quimbaya, Quindío. It's the coffee region, Mamalulu vegetable garden, where a grandmother, wise woman, teaches her children, uh, grandchildren to keep food security in that little piece of land they own, and to fight, that exercise the models of the unhealthy models, harmful models that is indirect, just the coffee crops. But this is a different option for sustainable livelihoods. They work on other crops. And it's one of the first models in Colombia to begin to promote the construction in bamboo to mitigate the traditional construction and to avoid that more trees being cut down. This is another initiative, native ecosystem protection. This is in Chigorodo. It's an organization that I represent. We are indigenous women, and we women are linked very strongly to the Indigenous Environmental Guard. We protect our sacred sites. You know that Urabá is one of the main centers of the armed conflict in Colombia. And the Vera people, my community, we are located in a very complex in America. It's been impacted the waters in the territories. That is one of the territories where there's been greater child death, and especially lack of nutrition as well. You have 5 minutes left. About to recover ancestral knowledge, we wanted to recover and pick up on the work of others from Nuki Corporation. Is a process of women. They've been working to recover the ancestral knowledge in that area. And then finally, political advocacy. In this network, there are women who are doing this nationwide. Atiquiwa is the first indigenous woman that she's been become a councilwoman in Bogota. Others representing the Amazon, other women who are defending human rights with the support of the Swiss, the German, the French embassies. We have been doing all this process to create environmental peace. We believe that these actions have allowed that our territories will see more well-being. You can see the location of the projects. We could not list all of them, but we are from San Andres Island, Guajira, Amazonas, Caquetá. These are some of the departments in Colombia, departments or states. We'd like to tell you what we want to do. As a network, we've identified that it's not something absolutely new. Past work has been really important to build on them, and it's been important into our territory. So we felt we needed to meet to continue to do political advocacy on gender, environment, and peace, and have an exchange, strengthening the territorial initiatives, and continue to work as a network because we believe that knowing and recognizing the work we do as women to protect the environment, to defend the environment, strategic, is fundamental to protect our territories. Finally, as conclusions, we feel it's important that we continue to integrate the gender perspectives into policies and programs for development and make progress and define goals to achieve parity. That's something Colombia has committed to. I'm sorry, there's too much noise. Other microphones are open. We also believe that it's time that we value and we recognize seriously and profoundly the contributions of the communities, the people's organization, to mitigate climate change and to protect our Mother Earth and the environment, and especially that the actions we've done, and what we women do to defend the territory in our daily life by sowing, knowing the plants, everything, protecting the jungle. This should give us our own space in the participation and decision-making spaces. Here's a picture. As you see, different women, peasant, indigenous women, 35 experiences in Colombia that we are protecting the environment and creating peace processes. And finally, I'd like to conclude with this poem. I can't see it really well. It says, for the territories, there's fresh air, big fresh air. Can you read? I'm sorry, I cannot see it. Yeah, I'll read it for you. Now, for territories, big trees, fresh air, and more love. For women, a lot of green, more listening, and sunlight. Now, for war, nothing. For war, nothing. That's all. Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity. And she said thank you in her native language. Thank you, Nataly. Nataly has done very important work to highlight the role of women, indigenous women who weave life, peace, and future. She's identified some of the issues that they have had to face and they continue to face for environmental governance. And also she has highlighted the important work being done. from the National Interethnic Network of Women to Defend the Environment. Concrete specific actions they have to do with work on the economy, on knowledge, wisdom, pedagogics, urban and rural issues. Very interesting view and very interesting specific actions. Thank you so much, Natalie. Okay, so we move on.
Con la profesora Carolina Montes.
Now we have Carolina Montes. She'll be talking about the environmental impact of the peace accords or the peace agreement. She's an attorney specialized in environmental law, a PhD in law, and postdoctorate studies ongoing now. Research in environmental law at Externado University, legal consultant at public and private institutions, such as the Ministry of Environment. She's worked with the National Plan on the application of the Calm Agreement, also studies that have to do with business, corporate responsibility, Ministry of Mines, and also, of course, with all that background work at different institutions. And as a scholar, she has a lot to tell us about. You have 15 minutes, Carolina.
Muchas gracias, profesora Gloria Amparo.
Thank you, Gloria Amparo.
Los asistentes,
I want to
gracias
thank
por
all the
estar
attendees. Thank you for being here. Also, the event organizers, I also want to send my greetings. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about the environmental impact we've seen in Colombia after the signing of the peace agreement. This short intervention that I'll be giving will spin around a guiding question, and it will be whether the signing of the peace accords in Colombia had a positive or a negative impact to protect the environment in our country. Now, why are we asking ourselves this question? Why do I invite you to reflect on this question? Because during the years that the armed conflict lasted in Colombia, the environment was a victim as well as a beneficiary of this conflict. Why do we say it was a victim of the armed conflict? Why was the environment a victim? Because the guerrilla used as a war strategy against the state, they used to destroy infrastructure, for example, to transport oil, and then the environment was severely impacted. Also, because many times they uh, found income through illegal mining. Now, then why do we say that the environment was a beneficiary of the conflict? Because in many areas of the national territory, especially environmental areas that were environmentally protected during many decades, they were outside the colonization and the expansion of the agricultural frontier. Because in those areas, there were only armed illegal groups that they limited the arrival of other types of population. They couldn't come into those areas. So to know whether the signing of the peace agreement had a positive or negative impact on the environment in Colombia, I suggest that we look at, I'm sorry, her voice went off. We lost her. We don't have your audio. I'm sorry, Carolina, we cannot hear you. I'm sorry, I was muted. Okay. I don't know how further you heard.
Hola, ¿me confirmas hasta dónde alcanzaron a escuchar?
El último parrafito.
What do you hear? The last paragraph that you were just talking about. Okay. To know, again, to know whether the peace agreement had a positive or negative impact on the environment in Colombia, I suggest that we look at three main topics. The first one is to look at the content, the environmental content of the peace agreement, and then determine whether it included measures to prevent and restore environmental degradation in the document, how the environment had been a victim. Second, I'd like to analyze or identify what the post-agreement measures were, those that were adopted to implement the or deploy the agreement, and assess how it led whether to prevent or restore environmental degradation. Then finally, the third area I'd like to look at very briefly is the figures, the official figures of the last 5 years after the agreement or the post-agreement stage related to the status of the conservation or degradation of the environment in Colombia. And then based on that, we can draw conclusions whether the impact was positive or negative. Let's start with the environmental content in the peace agreement. First, we should point out that the agreement did not include as such an environmental chapter, even though the text, yes, there was reference in many opportunities to the search for environmental sustainability. Some authors explain that this lack of an environmental chapter was justified in the sense that the environmental topic was so important in the framework of the agreement to build peace, long-lasting peace in Colombia, that the writing was not to limit it to one chapter, but it should be embedded all across all the points of the agreement. But what were the points of the final agreement that were considered relevant to include the environmental topics, especially environmental references? They were included in 3 of the 6 points of the final agreement. First, point 1, towards a new Colombian field, agricultural reform. Point 3, end of conflict. And point 4, solution to the issue of illegal drugs. Points 1 and 4 talk about the environment the most. And now, what were the environmental concerns included in each one of those points, of those chapters that I said? Point 1 included 2 topics. The first one, social, environmental, sustainable planning for the territory, and number 2, closing the agricultural frontier. They decided to start by the second one, uh, limiting the agricultural frontiers through an environmental zoning plan and process to develop an inventory of environmental zones or special management zones. Based on that zoning, they wanted to prioritize zone for conservation, forest reserves, water protection areas, and also restoration zones. Point 3, in turn, wanted to identify possible programs or projects to protect the environment and humanitarian demining to be able to link the greatest number of demobilized members of FARC and then grant them for a single time one economical support that was about paying some of money so that they would develop those projects. And again, here, it could be an environmental project. And then finally, point 4, the replacement of illegal crops included a subchapter of environmental recovery tied to the limiting of the agricultural frontier, especially in the areas of national parks. Now, what were the measures that were adopted in the agreement? What was the regulation of the final agreement? So we can assess whether these measures definitely led to restoring or to preventing further environmental damage. So we talk about the second topic I mentioned. What was the legislation or the regulation of the environmental context of the agreement? First, point 1 of the agreement was regulated through several decrees. They adopted a process and access lands to formalize lands. There was a land fund, and there were development programs with a territorial focus. However, according to the prosecutor's office, with these figures that were created, there were conflicts with the vocation of the land use. Also a zoning plan, environmental zoning plan was, let's say, passed or approved by the ministry. About point 3, there were measures that promoted the assigning of lands for the development of productive processes. Some of them were environmental. This linked 3,000 ex-combatants with an investment close to 25,000 million Colombian pesos. They also reinforced the consolidation of the figure of payment for environmental services. And there were 2 documents. The first one, it was a policy and a program of payments for environmental services. And second, a decree law that sought to give this payment for environmental services other incentives or a different view and create other incentives. Now, why did we use that figure of payment for environmental services? Because there's no doubt that type of payment became an effective support to sort out environmental conflicts as well as social conflicts, because there could be different productive and environmental conservation activities. Also, thanks to these payments for environmental services, deforestation could be reduced and contribute to the environmental protection. Finally, the 4th point, it was through a decree that they created a national program to replace illegal crops. and they use it to promote the eradication, the removal of illegal crops in national natural parks, and then declare in year 2019 that these areas were free of illegal crops, especially in 10 out of the 23 impacted national natural parks. That's one of the biggest challenges of this program, to replace illegal crops. You have 2 minutes left. I'm sorry? Oh, 5 minutes left. Let's see what's been the environmental impact of the agreement, regardless of those measures that the government adopted. Let's start with the positive impact. The positive impact of the agreement on the environment is that we had access to certain areas of ecological importance to do more studies on biodiversity. 8,800 hectares and 639 families were linked to the program of payment for environmental services. So we had the environmental zoning, and there were 16 environmental zoning maps. They contributed sustainably to get to know our territory even more. That was a priority. And there was the replacement of illegal crops, as I said before, in areas in national natural parks and also forest reserves. 42,339 hectares were removed from illegal crops. And what was the negative impact? Even though there was a reduction in the attacks to oil pumps or oil pipes, that didn't stop, and they also continued to blow them up. Between 2016 and 2020, there were 233 attacks to oil pipes. It was the most critical year, especially 2018, with 84 attacks. And also, this created huge environmental impact. Another negative impact was deforestation. Is reported that after they signed the agreement in 2016, we could see a bigger concern because a big increase of deforestation in Colombia, especially the departments in the Amazon, Guaviare, Meta, and Caquetá. These are states in the Amazon. These are the biggest. There was more impact there. Deforestation increased in our country at least 44%. After the signing of the peace agreement, and in 2017, the annual deforestation rate increased by 70% in the Amazon region of Colombia. This is all information from IDEAM, the Institute of Environmental Studies. And it continued increasing in 2018, according to Linares. High deforestation is because after the signing of the peace agreement, then these other illegal groups took the possession of the areas, land grabbers, livestock ranchers, and other illegal crops interests, just amongst other stakeholders. So as a conclusion, after this analysis, the positive and negative impacts of the agreement, after signing the agreement, we realized that yes, it's true that the figures of areas and the scheme of payment for environmental services and the replacement of legal crops in national natural parks and forest reserves, they are important figures, yes. It might seem like they are much less than the areas impacted by attacks to the oil lines and the areas of strategic importance that were degraded and deforested. So the scale is a greater negative impact on the environment in this period after the agreement, after the peace agreement. What are the causes? What could have been the causes? The weak environmental content of the peace agreement because there were not effective measures to prevent or restore environmental degradation. Number two, the post-agreement measures did not effectively lead to prevent or restore environmental degradation. And then finally, the institution in our country is not strong, was not ready to take on the environmental control that was needed in the territories. So what is pending the agreement? Of course, we missed that they did not include strategies in the areas that were cleared, nor in the concentration areas where the old troops of the FARC would be located. There was also a miss of the environmental recovery measures that should be carried out in the areas of the national territory where the attacks to oil pops left severe environmental damage. They did not discuss also the environmental displaced individuals, peasants, farmers in distant locations who had to leave and flee their lands because of environmental damage. In conclusion, our scale is more negative. We can say that the negative impacts of the peace agreement is more notorious than the positive impact that we have found after the signing of the agreement. Thank you for your attention.
Muchísimas gracias, profesora Carolina. La profesora nos ha hablado
Thank you,
sobre
Carolina.
este tema de
You have
cómo
talked
todos
about
estos
the
mecanismos
negative or positive
unidos
impacts
del acuerdo de paz
of the
y
peace
del
agreement
desacuerdo.
and
En
the
ese sentido,
post-agreement
¿qué ha
stage.
pasado
What's
después
happened afterwards, the aftermath of the agreement, what was included in the agreement. But in addition to that, it calls our attention that there are two key points, which is the lack of, let's say that the agreement should have been clearer in that respect. And number two, how we continue to suffer very complex situations related to the conflicts, such as the attacks to the oil pipes and also the deforestation. Thank you very much, Carolina. I want to tell you that you can get your questions ready. You can write them in the chat box, the questions for the panelists, because we'll continue to have this discussion. We can talk about all these topics. Now we continue with Lorena Moreno Real. She's a student at Florida University in Magister in Latin American Studies from Leyte University, sociologist, anthropologist from the Colombian National University, and co-founder of Foundation Jauda on Amazon Studies and coordinator of the research seed called, Follow-up on the implementation of a peace agreement in the Amazon. Lorena, I think it's a very interesting topic, very up to date. I think you bring us interesting news about the collective work you've done. And also, as you know, today, Colombia is living a very complex situation of forest fires in the Amazon, which also call us to take a look at what's happening with this region after the agreement. Lorena, you have the floor.
Muchísimas gracias. Estoy muy contenta de poder participar en este panel.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to participate in the panel. I'm also very pleased to have Gloria Amparo as the moderator. And I'm pleased to be with the other panelists. Please allow me to share my screen.
¿Ya la ven? Listo. Bueno, en primer
I
lugar,
hope you can see my presentation. First of all, I'd like to tell you that this work is collective effort. 2 years ago, it was a partnership between the National University of Colombia and Jauda Foundation. We created, it was a public call, it was a research seed follow-up on the peace agreement in the Colombian Amazon. The purpose was to have a citizen initiative, especially to look at the agreements in the Amazon region. DJ Moreno and Sebastián Silva, together with me, we got together to follow up on this point number 3, the end of the conflict. We decided to focus on the department called Guaviare because there are big challenges to gather information on the implementation of the peace agreements in the Amazon region. You might understand the access there, the departments, you cannot travel by land. There's not land transportation. There isn't much information available either. Well, fortunately, I was able to do field work in June last year, and we've been able to gather some information through interviews. We've also reviewed the press releases, and also we've done literature review. Okay, so the work is called The Influence of the Implementation of the Peace Agreements on the Deforestation of Guaviare Department in Colombia.
Presentación, la deforestación empezó a ser una problemática fundamental.
Deforestation became a main issue, especially after the signing of the peace agreements. Since 2016, there's been a dramatic increase of deforestation, especially in the departments of the Amazon. Say Meta is one of the departments here. We can see the south of Meta, Caquetá, and Guaviare. These are states or departments in Colombia. As you can see in the map, we see that the places with the greatest deforestation intensity are located in environmental protection areas, and precisely where we also see the agricultural frontier. So it has meant not only the degradation of the forest, but also the expansion of the agricultural frontier. This is the 2018 map, then the 2021 map. We continue to see in these same regions, the same areas, they continue to be site where the different stakeholders, they drive motivation, and that's where they are located. And it seems like, in spite of the fact that the attention of the media, what's taking place, thanks to the support of different international cooperation agencies, it seems like it's been a challenge, a big challenge for the government, I mean, the current administration. Okay, how can we interpret deforestation in the post-agreement times? We've conducted, or there have been a lot of analysis, and the analysis, for example, GP from 2020, they emphasize that this is a phenomenon with different reasons, different root causes. There are different drivers behind deforestation, such as informality of access and also land titles, but also speculation and the concentration of the land market, the informal and illegal use of the land, the difficulties to use the land sustainable, especially the forest, as well as the institutional weakness and certain contradictions in public policies. We've seen that many stakeholders, especially those who are financing deforestation, are linked to the illegal economies, and they seek to accrue lands and grab lands through partnerships with local officials or local clerks or public servants. That's something I heard in Guaviare, that these illegal actors, not necessarily are they hiding. I mean, there is knowledge. It is known. People usually know, so to speak, who could be responsible, the responsible parties. So even though there have been strategies to mitigate deforestation, especially to process that environmental crime, actually it's not being done. It's not taking place. It's also interesting to see how there's been an approach, let's say, to secure environmental governance. I mean, we see how the national government has used different military strategies. For example, the Artemisa operation to try to control deforestation. However, we've seen that those that have been captured or arrested is those who have been caught just there in the midst of deforestation. But those who have driven, those who have supported, sponsored it, who pay, they're not visible because there's an intermediary chain. There's a chain of middlemen. So it's even people who got paid to cut down a hectare. It's difficult to determine who actually gave the money or gave the order. And then on the other hand, it's important to emphasize that yes, it's true that the current discourse of the government focuses on territorial peace. As researchers of peace or investigators have pointed out, it'd be a lot better to focus on environmental peace. The idea the peace building, the idea that peace building should include the relations between communities and between human beings and non-humans as well. Okay, there's a generalized myth, especially in the media, that actually deforestation is a consequence of a lack of the state presence. Nonetheless, after reviewing the historical presence of the state in the region, we've noticed that at least since the 20th century, the beginning of the 20th century, there's been an incentive for extractive economies interests. Rafael Reyes, for example, he even had interest in exploiting rubber in the 20th century in the Punumayo department. We also see how the state participates actively in promoting colonization, say by empowered peasants and those without land who suffered the violence period in the 1950s. So industries such as the oil extraction in Putumayo, thanks to that, the state has promoted the construction of roads and infrastructure to facilitate the exploitation of natural resources. plus, based on what we have seen, especially in the last decades, is that there have been several campaigns and military campaigns. We can track the military presence in the Amazon, in the Colombian Peruvian War in the 1930s, but also in the last decades with the Colombia Plan, Democratic Security Program, the Patriotic Plan at the beginning of this century. So this leads us to say that it's not that, I mean, if we think about this holistically, the state has not been present in the region. They've been present sometimes, but with some specific institutions. On the other hand, we've seen that FARC had a historical process of the land grabbing. They actually established guidelines to organize the territory. That was in the 60s, 70s. It was armed colonization. That's the term it was given. So the guerrilla was a key actor to promote that colonization, especially in the foothills of the Amazon. Now, with the appearance of the coca and the marijuana economies, the guerrillas began to exercise control in these lands, especially by providing protection to the stakeholders, those involved in the illegal business, and then they wanted to have a monopoly of violence. However, when there were other protection groups to protect the local mafia or paramilitaries, that's when we began to see these disputes over territory. These armed fights meant a greater impact, especially differentiated impact on the civilians. And we began to see a delegitimization. However, in different zones in Guaviare, in rural areas, they said that the guerrilla backed up a lot of the agreements, common law agreements, many norms established by the Community Action Board to administer resources. So let's say that we can see there's social exercise supported by illegal armed groups. In the analysis on as to why deforestation is taking place in Colombia, it is said, okay, precisely after the peace agreement, the guerrilla of FARC demobilized, and there was a power gap, a power vacuum. That analysis, that idea of this lack of power is getting rid of other community orders, other types of organization, other ways of planning the territory. And it ignores that somehow the state was there. The state was not legitimate, but it was still there. Okay, so what we focused on was to see how the implementation of the peace agreement related to deforestation. Is it only the power vacuum the FARC left that promoted deforestation? In other words, they were protecting the territory, quote, quote, protecting the territory from other actors who wanted to grab lands or to, let's say, grow illegal crops. So we see different points as presented by the previous panelists, and they have to do with the deforestation factors. There's one that we can see notably, point number 4, and is the implementation of the peace agreement and the territorial development plan, PDET, or PDET in Spanish. We have seen many families, communities that are part of this program. PDET is territorial or yes, development plan for the territory with an territorial approach. It means that there are families who are settled in forest reserves. Actually, they have signed agreements or pacts with the program to begin to get the resources and begin with a productive project, even in reserved zones. So the program officials, they find that they cannot finance a given productive program in those sites because they have a different vocation. It's a forest reservation. And they cannot justify that productive processes take place there to replace illegal crops that are right there. So point number 3, we see there are mixed results. because most of ex-combatants have been left in transition spaces limited. However, there is the front number one, that is a decent front that wants to become legitimate because of the political will of the government. What does mean? And before the officials came to establish agreements with the communities, people from that front were trying to convince inhabitants not to sign. The argument was that they would be fooled by the government or betrayed by the government. Many believed that the process would be quick, efficient. However, there have been delays in the payments, and unbelievably speaking, could mean more legitimacy for the illegal group. They are dissidents of the FARC. They had warned that the state would not comply with their promises, would not keep their promises. Now, about the incorporation process, it's also at risk because the state did not comply, and then there are new processes and difficulties with lands for the ex-combatants. That's also a warning that we heard from Cajiao in an article in 2020, a paper he wrote in 2020. In conclusion, we've seen after the historic analysis of the review that the history of Amazon territory, the Amazon lands have been traditionally disputed by those who inhabit, those who have settled there. And also environmental governance after the peace agreement has been marked by a contradiction between the local discourse and the reality. For example, the road Calmar Villa Flores was, let's say, promoted by a former governor in Guaviare department amidst the crossing forest reserve. I mean, it was not possible for the state to promote to build a road going across that reserve zone to promote building a road on this side that it's not, say, does not have the vocation. I mean, you cannot cross through it, and communities cannot settle there. And our conclusion, big conclusion, is that the Colombian state was able to dissolve the oldest guerrilla group in America by the responsibility to protect the ecosystem, the Amazon ecosystem that was part of the commitments did not happen. Consequently, the increase of the figures of environmental degradation in the region is not a result of the demobilization of the FARC guerrilla, but the inability of the Colombian government to implement the peace agreements.
Agradezco cualquier comentario, pregunta.
Thank you for your attention. I'm welcome to, I'm willing to answer questions. Questions are welcome. Thank you, Lorena. So Lorena talked about a very interesting zone, not only for our country, but for the whole world. Another important point is that this zone has ecological and cultural value, and it continues to be impacted as a consequence of the armed conflict and as a consequence of many other activities that have to do with the, let's say, how deforestation is growing, also the illegal crops. And she also talked about how the peace agreement has been implemented or not implemented. That Lorena also talked about the delays in the implementation, how the PDTs and the replacement programs have not achieved the goals they had set out. And she also talked very clearly about the territorial disputes that have taken place throughout time, and also especially now in that territory that is so important. Lorena also talked about how environmental governance has become a discourse, a speech, highlighting that that speech is not just, I mean, it's not only at the local level, but also national level. And it calls our attention, she calls our attention to take urgent action. Okay, thank you very much, Lorena. I know that this presentation was also supported by another two researchers, Sebastián Silva and Lilibet Moreto, right? I don't know if very quickly they'd like to add something else, because I understood they wanted to add something very specific. I don't know if they have something to add, Lilibet and Sebastián. You want to add anything?
Hola, buenas tardes.
Sí,
Soy
Lilibet.
Jiménez Moreno.
Yes, hello, I'm Lijibet Moreno. For the time being, I think our colleague, as the spokesperson of the group, she summarized what we wanted to say. So maybe in the question session, we might add something, but not right now. Okay, there was a third talk by a researcher called Natalia Jiménez, who unfortunately could not join us today because of a circumstance of last minute thing. It was a delicate issue, so unfortunately, she's an attorney and she's been working on very interesting topics, such as the impact of parks, natural parks, the conflict, what's happened with the conflict in the national natural parks. It's sad news that she could not join us. Okay, so I'm not missing anyone, right? Frey, am I missing something for today's presentations? Then I'd like to open the microphone, the floor for questions. Notice that all these elements we've heard of today, that view of women, that view of the impact created before and after the conflict, the environmental impacts, the additional view, what we've heard, the work of the communities, the work of researchers who have joined us today. They have told us about what's happening with the peace agreement, what progress has been made, whether we can implement it or not. Well, this all leads to questions, and we will be, hopefully we'll be able to walk this path. There's a first question. I'd like to encourage all of you to continue to place your questions. Do send your questions or comments, and I'm going to pass this question that is for Carolina, and it has to do with something she did not really talk about. Carolina did not talk about the death of environmental leaders, which is one of the results of the lack of the implementation of the agreements. That it means the lack of presence of the state in Colombia and the impasse, let's say that the communities cannot implement governance in their territories. Carolina.
Gracias. Sí, profesora Gloria Amparo. Definitivamente el
Yes,
asesinato
definitely the killing of social and especially environmental leaders is another negative consequence of the lack of proper implementation of the agreements. That's why it's important to measure that impact. It's a topic that goes outside the content of my talk. Actually, I just wanted to look at the environmental concerns, but yes, I shared that position that this person, that it was not included as one of the negative things. There's no doubt environmental leaders have played a key role in protecting the environment and in protecting or in guaranteeing that the communities may have access to resources, not to leave out the issue of environmental displacement. But the continued killings of social and environmental leaders or environmental defenders has caused that many people who were in trying to defend the environment, they became quiet. They had to silence their voices and they chose to protect their lives and then not protect the environment, because there's no doubt, this is no secret to anybody. I invite you to read an interesting article published by Linares author. I think it's Mauricio Linares. I think also worked with Rosario University. This was in 2019, where he talked about the mafias that were behind all of this, behind the cleared areas, how they had taken possession, they had grabbed the land, especially now because of illegal mining, gold mining especially. Yes, of course, it's a sensitive issue and it's true. It's something that we should analyze in greater depth about that big issue that it's very sad. We're all sorry about this, not only as Colombians, but as environmentalists. Thank you very much, Carolina. It's unbelievable that with all these topics that we have at hand, all the difficulties with the environmental defenders, with the big number of killings and murders, Right now, we still do not have clear strategies to be able to sort them out, to resolve those cases. It's necessary to make progress in that direction to protect life in all forms and to protect those who protect life and protect the environment. That's essential. Thank you, Carolina. Manuel Gallo asks, as long as we don't intervene in on the income of legal economies, well, as long as we do not stop that relation in the peasant economies, then the illegal crop replacement programs will not work. Or also the illegal mining, small scale. I guess he means that relation should be removed. It's a very big discussion that has been taken into account, and it's the economic projects, the need to strengthen the peasant community so that they don't have to do illegal crops. I'd like to ask the perception, the view from Natalie about that work you do with women, this a statement. What do you think about this statement from Mr. Gallo?
Sí, yo creo que lo abordé un poco también en la presentación que
I
hice.
think I did mention it a little bit in the presentation. There are some specific reports. They report the killings of social leaders, specifically environmental leaders in Colombia. There are already reports that define this. It's something clear that people, those of us who are defending the territories, those who take care of nature and the environment, are subject of threats. We have been military targets, and people who have interests to extract the resources and let's say they go against those of us who protect the environment. There are statistics now. It's been a report that we have done. We, the communities, have reported this. Institutions have reported it as well. Those who try to protect their territories, they have reported the threats and the killings of environmental leaders and also social leaders in Colombia as a whole. Okay, about illegal crops, would any of the panelists like to add anything else based on that comment? Yes, I'd like to add something. The situation in Guaviare and in the Amazon as a whole is that there have been places, new places to sow illegal crops, to plant illegal crops. For example, the border between Colombia and Peru in Putumayo department, actually around Leticia, the capital city of the Amazon department, especially with the pandemic, they have become sites or places where there have been more and more illegal crops. And there have been disputes between different armed groups or what they call cartels and dissidents of the FARC. That's something we can see in the Colombian-Venezuelan border. In Guaviare, yes, we've seen that the coca crops are a deforestation driver, one of the drivers of deforestation. However, as the government has pointed out, it's not the only reason. For example, the South, the Natural PAC Reserve, it's been noted that there has been more incentive for peasant families that are there, also descendant groups, and also other groups that are financing illegal crops. So, as I said, it's one of the reasons, but it's not necessarily the main reason of deforestation. The small farmers that go and cut down some hectares to plant cocaine. No, it's that, I mean, it's not what has caused this increase in deforestation. What we have seen is that there are big areas of land near Chiribiquete where they are having extensive livestock, like a lot of meat that is being commercialized from their beef, basically, livestock projects there in that region of the country. That's a bigger driver. Interesting, Lorraine. I like to call the attention of researchers. It's an interesting discussion that is taking place at the legal level and the impact of the criminal law that was just passed about this topic regarding farmers. It was passed last year. We need to analyze what it means for peasants, especially farmers who have to use natural resources. And sometimes they're not the big deforestation drivers. Natalie, there's another question for you. What are your views? What should we keep in mind to have projects and social environmental initiatives of international cooperation so that they include more women?
Sí, pues nosotras, como lo hemos especificado también en las diferentes categorías que expusimos, pues como mujeres.
Yes, we have mentioned this in different categories. We, as women, we have led several initiatives. I think production, conservation, a native ecosystem preservation, also the conservation of ancestral practices. These are projects, and we have a direct connection to the protection of the territory. I think the policies and the initiatives focused, and I mean, from international cooperation, they should take into account these processes that we, the communities, have led in the territories. Build on that. I guess the Amazon and different parts of Colombia, there have been valuable initiatives to protect the environment, especially to have food sovereignty, food security, to recover seeds, especially to recover ancestral knowledge. And it's all connected to the preservation of and the good life of the communities in the territories. So I believe an important point that we see is how we continue to protect the environment and how we can continue to protect social leaders. We, the leaders who want to live our lives in the territories. Good life means not only the physical thing, but the relation, the comprehensive relation that we, the peoples, have with the life systems, with the sacred sites, our water sources. That protection is not only life of human beings, which is important, but also the protection should be on the life of the territory. That's what we have suggested, what we have stated, the rights of Mother Earth. How we conceive that protection of the rights of Mother Earth, that's an important point that we are working on, and we, the local community envision, and we, the women who have been discussing, and we have tried to include it in the network, how to create policies and actions so that we can protect the Mother Earth or the territory.
Bueno, una pregunta que nos hace Diego Garzón.
There's a question by Diego Garzón. Is there a relation between the progress of the agricultural frontier and the armed conflict? Is the relation in the pressure between the armed stakeholders and the mining projects in these areas, in red areas such as Urabá and the Amazon? Now, which of the panelists would like to jump in? I can start. It's a very wide question. I'd like to start by the second part. If there's a relation between the pressure of the armed stakeholders and the energy projects, we've seen that the history of the economy of the Amazon has been characterized by extractive projects. We understand these as mining energy projects, but if we talk to the peasant communities, especially indigenous communities, they emphasize the fact that an extractive project could be also legal economy. I mean, tourism, in the sense that unless there are FPIC processes, if there are in construction processes to build this in a participatory manner, these economies could become another form of resource extraction, not natural resources, but yes, they could have the extraction or the end of some ecosystemic service without any benefit for the local community. When it's a big local, a big tourism project. So the state, and I mean, depending on the different environmental protection figures, I mean, law 2 of forest reserves, there are some limitations to finance productive projects to build infrastructure. However, I think it's key that we take a look at the south of Meta department because it is thought that in Meta department, their the agricultural frontier went beyond or further, but in La Macarena region, there are still disputes over the territory. There is the presence of the illegal crops. There are different armed actors. There are killings of community leaders. So recently, we heard that there was a potential for oil production, oil exploitation. So it's still there. We see that we thought they had been sorted out and they were only agriculture, had the agricultural vocation or livestock. There are still disputes over the territory. So those actions, those dynamics in these sites that are in the foothills of the valleys, somehow they begin to grow, to expand to the Amazon valleys or to the flatlands of the Amazon. That's south of Guaviare, close to Chiribiquete and Caquetá department. So yes, of course, yes, there is an impact given the relation between the conflict and the increase or the progress, the expansion of the agricultural frontier. We can see that as noticing where the illegal crops are, for example, where there are new roads are being built, and they have not been planned by the state. Other actors begin to open roads or just unpaved roads, and that's where we begin to see the colonization. So this situation is very complex. And what I'd like to stress is that it's important to take the context into account, the regional context, because it's not easy to generalize, who, and it's not only the Amazon. Okay, would anybody else like to add? Yes, I'd like to have a follow-up. I think it's a very valuable contribution, and has to do with what we live in Urabá, in the northwest of the country. And it's that all the extraction economies, they are not only mining, for example, in Urabá, displacement, we've seen peasant communities, indigenous communities, African Colombian communities have been displaced, has been because of extractive interests, especially extensive livestock that has been very harmful there. And you feel, let's say, in certain areas that are so complex and there is conflict, we feel the communities, we are trying to come up with our processes, partnerships to define the little that's left, because it's very painful to see how big forests have been cut down for the use of livestock, also to plant African oil palms. And it's not necessarily, it's not always mining, but these are economies that have destroyed the jungle. And precisely the communities are located there in the Urabá, in the highlands, the mountains, because all the flatlands, you go there and it's just extensive livestock or crops. So our defense is that those highlands that are there, the mountains where we are protecting, and not necessarily us, the communities, because we have partnerships with farmers, those who are protecting the areas. And we don't want to let things get worse. Those areas are being intervened by illegal crops, with illegal crops that impact water sources, sacred sites that I told you about before. And it's not mining, but it's other types of economies that have impacted and continue to impact us. And control has been exercised because of through fear and the presence of illegal armed groups. So all this displacement, all the impact on the territories and the communities is taking place basically because of the presence of illegal armed groups that have threatened, that they have intimidated, and they have impacted the communities. Along that line, Giovanni Herrera asks a question. He says the General Attorney's Office recently showed their efficiency, quote, quote, in investigation and determination of responsibility in a case of a homicide of a person who worked in a beauty parlor. And then the question is, has the attorney office been equally efficient in investigating and determining the responsibilities of homicides of social and environmental leaders in the country? So do you think that the prosecutor's office has been efficient? There was a case of a murder of a guy who worked a beauty parlor, and then they were able to identify the responsible party very quickly. So the question is if this has been the case with the human rights defenders and environmental defenders. Well, the work of the prosecutor's office is important everywhere, but sometimes in these cases, it's not so efficient. I mean, it was explained by the prosecuting attorney that knew the work of the attorney's office, what they were doing. But these killings of social leaders, yes, definitely, they have been left behind. They've been left in the in, amidst institutional carelessness. And of course, they do important work, the institution, but the level of difficulty there is in the case of this, the killing of a hairdresser, they had all the elements at hand. It was easy to determine, but many times we don't understand if the social leader is looking for protection, asking for protection, and they want to protect the environment, and it's a benefit that we all receive because they are being attacked, but it's a question, deep question we should ask ourselves, but mainly it can be justified that just because they are in distant regions or because they the media is not there on top because it was not the hairdresser of the show business, then it depends a lot on the media, right? The media plays let's say a role, and I think in this sense they have not paid attention to the importance to the killings of, I mean, the level of difficulty will be different, but they have not given the importance of the killings of social and environmental leaders, and probably these cases that have not received the due diligence and the attention of the media and the attention of the attorney's office. So in this case, we are not the same. I mean, the killing of a dresser calls more attention of the media than the killing of a social leader, of a environmental defender. So I think as a society, we should challenge ourselves, question ourselves, what we pay more attention to. I mean, nobody um, can be assassinated, of course. I mean, any human being, any Colombian, you know, needs to be protected in case of a killing. The state should make the same effort to investigate and find the responsible or the guilty parties. Okay, we have 10 minutes left so that we try to answer them. Frank Cabrera, legalize, technify, or equalize. These words, this replacement failed in 5 countries, 5 times marijuana and cocaine, thousands of uses. Modify environmental system, same authority of environmental license. They also control, just like in Brazil, it does not allow investigating or monitoring. So how to understand that the core of environmental center is alternative studies and to work with the impacted communities. And that means to say no when by law and not through a decree, they can manipulate through mining and dams, water dams. Any is that it's not clear. So what happened? The review of many mines. The interesting criticism, a lot of ideas. It was not a full sentence, but we'd like to hear what you think about this topic. It's more common or a list of ideas.
Complejo, ¿no? Complejo y muchos
Pretty
elementos.
complex, a lot of elements, a lot of ideas, but interesting, yes. Carolina, you have worked on environmental impact. How do you see this comment or list of ideas? I was just trying to read it and understand it because it has many things, a lot of words. You can clearly see what the question is. I mean, they talk about legalizing. It talks about I don't know, the 5 countries where it was done, I don't modified environmental system. Maybe I can talk about 2 ideas based on all the words that were written. Actually, in our country, we do have difficulties with environmental concerns. Yes, there is some legislation, and it's been there close to 5 years. I'm sorry, 50 years. Law 23 of 73 was the first environmental law, and it's important. But from my viewpoint, and it's just my opinion, I'm not talking on behalf of the university, I think environmental law is limited. It has several limitations to guarantee the effective protection of nature. That's why we have used some sentences uh, that have declared nature as a subject of right. So first, we talk about the environmental system. I think the comment talks about the environmental system and the tools. To begin with, environmental law has limitations. It's not perfect, it's not complete, but it's been an important tool that we have taken advantage of. It still needs adjustment and amendments. Yes, we are talking about the environmental licenses and to analyze the environmental impacts. Even the state and the environmental license authority or the corporations, they don't have the technical capabilities to supervise and monitor after issuing a license. And definitely we have an anthropocentric view and not ecocentric view. That's something we highlight about this worldview that the communities have and how they relate to the environment. We should learn from them to bring a new view as a country on the exploitation of natural resources. And as long as it is a lot more profitable to have illegal mining and illegal crops are more profitable than sustainable agricultural production and the environmental production. Well, in a country with such unsatisfied basic needs, people will continue to follow the illegal path. Okay, thank you very much. Another question or comment. Why don't they protect the subsistence economy with the prior consultation beyond the ethnic groups? That's an interesting point. And how to involve the inhabitants of cities so that they become concerned and take as their own the issue of deforestation. So I'd like to um, have Natalie answer first, and then Lorena.
Bueno, yo considero que, bueno, quiero responder la segunda
I'd like
nos
to try to answer the second part of the question, that is how to involve the urban citizens, urban inhabitants. I guess partly we need to highlight there are big initiatives there too. They are being conceived. They look for ways to preserve. And I gave an example of several people, women, men too, who are doing sustainable economy processes in the cities, like urban sustainable vegetable gardens. We can highlight that. And also different ways, I guess, education at different levels. We need to continue to promote the to value the environment. It's a global issue, it's a global concern. It's not just an issue of the communities that are there in the fields, in the territories, but it's an issue to the whole humanity. Maybe that I'd say there are some processes, yes, they should be more, they should be bigger, harder, but we need to value what we already have, what is being done, and then begin to, based on that, begin to work on environmental awareness that is important to everyone.
Gracias, Lorena.
Bueno,
Lorena?
son preguntas muy sugerentes.
Well, very interesting questions. The question about prior consultation for not ethnical communities, at least that they're not identified as ethnical communities. I think there is a potential in the implementation of point 2 of the agreement on political participation. And in general terms, supposedly all planning instruments should include FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent. But as we've heard from other interventions throughout the conference, in the case of Colombia, there are difficulties so that these participation processes are an expression of true participatory democracy. It's not just to the special requirement, but also to propose, to suggest agreement spaces with communities, bottom up, and then establish dialogue spaces with the state bodies. About the second question, I think there should be greater support to research projects, especially citizen initiatives. The example from our seedbed, I guess it's important because we do not have any funds from any type of work we do. It's just voluntary. And I believe that there should be funds to promote these research projects. I mean, bottom up, so to speak. I mean, many times, those of us who do not have an exclusive affiliation to university, it's very hard to look for resources, to get the permits, just to travel from Bogota, the capital city, to the Amazon. That's already expensive. It can only be done by plane. So just to have access to that deep part of Colombia, I guess we need more support there. And we should look for more citizens who are interested in supporting our processes. Okay, Natalie, environmental services. What do you think of that, of environmental services? I do think it's an important question because I believe that, yes, it's true. It's something that we, the communities, have gained, and there have been institutions and interests that have facilitated this for this to happen. I believe that there should be more consultation with the community as to how to implement the payments for environmental services. We see it's plans, projects that arrive to the communities. They get there, but there's no prior consultation with the community. And I also think that one of the proposals we had as indigenous women and from many other organizations that they have administration, let's say bodies in place to be able to do this so that the communities themselves take on these programs and they receive the benefits because we have defended the territory on everything we've done. So I do think it's important. I also think that more should be done, and they should ask what the community wants and the technical and administrative capabilities that the organizations have to be able to take on those services and get the payments for environmental services. Okay, thank you very much. There are a few more questions I'd like to ask Carl, whether we have extra time or we have to end on time. Just 1 or 2 minutes. Okay, a short question for panelists. In your opinion, the sentence of the Supreme Justice Court in 2018 that declared the Amazon as a subject of rights, then currently, now in 2022, 4 years later, was it fulfilled? Was it enforced or not? Lorena, you work in the Amazon. Okay, according to the progress report from Justice, it was the organization that supported this request, supported by several children and adolescents, so that the constitutional or the Supreme Court better would declare the Amazon as a subject of rights. We've seen that there's been a lot of flaws, a lot of delays in enforcing the mandate for different institutions, what was established in that sentence. In other words, yes, it is in paper. It serves as an instrument, but actually we can't say that it has been enforced. It can't. It hasn't been enforced. So the agreements that have been achieved, they have not been enforced. And it's also part of the role of the social sensitivity. Those who have to comply because the institutions, the state bodies should be supervised by citizens. I mean, okay, thank you. We have a lot of topics at hand on the table, many topics to continue to talk, to continue to build and contribute to this process of peace building. Angles from regions, views from research, views at all levels. We'd like to encourage you to continue to attend discussions. There'll be an interesting panel also led by Professor Angela Maria Maya on the rights of nature and its relation to peace building. And we'd like to tell you, I mean, we hope you can attend because this is all being built. We are still open to comments. We welcome comments. We want to continue with this process. I want to thank Carl, Frederick, these wonderful women who have joined us today, and every one of you, those of you who are doing research on Colombia. There's a lot to thank for, thanks to the support you've given us. I know that you are very concerned throughout the world. We are all very concerned about peace building in our country, and peace building in Colombia means peace for all humanity. A big hug to everyone. It's been an interesting panel with all these views, and we hope that we can meet again in these dialogues, in these exchange of knowledge. Thanks, Natalie. This exchange of the academia, the scholars, public administration, they all have a big say. Thank you, Carl. Thank you, all of those of you who have joined us. Everyone who's joined us today, a big hug from Colombia. Have a great day.